So the owners of Open Chats, a podcast, have issued an unconditional apology for derogatory remarks made about coloured people. This after the race group was described as crazy and incestuous in an episode aired 2 weeks ago. In a letter of apology, the podcaster says it regrets the racist and sexist remarks, adding that it does not support any form of racism, discrimination or segregation. The ANC and the EFF have expressed outrage, while the Patriotic Alliance has lodged a formal complaint with the Equality Court and the Human Rights Commission. The DA has also indicated it intends to report the matter. Well, African Star Communications has approached the South African Human Rights Commission calling for tough action against the podcasters.
There is a duty not to entice hatred when you have a platform. They are an award-winning podcast. And, you know, when you have a platform like that, you need to understand that you can't cross the ethical lines. You can't cross legal ones either. So approaching the Human Rights Commission is making sure that something is done about this. They're fined. There are some consequences. They apologize properly, because apologizing and telling people they're too sensitive is not going to cut it with my community. I don't think they should ever think that that's going to be enough. An example needs to be made. And if, like I said, if it's them, then so be it.
So let's stay with the story. Joining us is a Patriotic Alliance spokesperson, Mr. Steve Mutale. We're joined also by Media Monitoring Africa's director, William Bird, and the South African Podcasters Guild's Diego Domingo. Gentlemen, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I do want to get just initial reactions to having seen the video. I mean, it was of course, you know, streamed live as they were having this discussion, and then made the rounds on various platforms and social media, continues to do so, much to the rage of many South Africans. But William, I don't know if you were able to see that discussion and your initial thoughts seeing it. 4 young people having that discussion, when you heard what they had to say, your views?
Well, look, obviously it's profoundly upsetting and concerning that people are casually throwing around racist insults around a group in South Africa. And, you know, it's something that whenever you're exposed to these kinds of issues and to such flagrant racism, that you are always shocked and deeply concerned by the kind of thing that would lead to people suggesting and thinking that that's okay and doing so in a particularly jocular approach, you know. So I think that it's an appropriate response for people to be very angry and offended and deeply hurt by many of the particular comments. And it's also then the appropriate response to make sure that you report that sort of thing to the South African Human Rights Commission so that they can air it and determine whether it is racism and repugnant and revolting speech, or whether it crosses the line into hate speech.
Yeah, Diego, I want to come to you. The South African Podcasters Guild, perhaps you can talk to us about really the role of the Podcasters Guild as we talk about, you know, the growth of podcasters in the country, and then your initial view of that discussion with these particular podcasters.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, to start off, the role of the Podcasters Guild is to build a community of podcasters and to grow the industry in South Africa as a whole. And over the last year and a bit that we've been established, we've actually seen that growth, and we've got over 400 podcasters currently registered with us. We've also established a SAPG pledge, which speaks against hate speech and racism, and kind of holds our podcasters to account, because when they sign up with us, they do agree to that pledge as well. So I think that is the view of SAPG. But when we have a look at what's occurred on the Open Chats podcast, is we do vehemently come against any forms of hate speech or racism or discrimination of any kind. And we are big advocates of the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. But that does have certain limitations, which is outlined by the Human Rights Commission, and does speak against hate speech. So you can have freedom of speech, but to an extent.
Yeah, and we need to perhaps start to get to a point where we talk about that balance, right? The freedom of speech, the responsibility that comes with it, and really how you share that balance and the information of it in a world where anyone can take up a platform now and be able to build quite the following. But Mr. Mutale, the Patriotic Alliance having taken the issue forward, and you know, we saw Gayton McKenzie asking the legal minds of the Patriotic Alliance to act swiftly?
Yeah, good evening to you and good evening to the viewers. I heard you talking about the fact that the podcast has made an apology. Well, that apology was generic and, of course, it lacked details. Now, we have sent them a letter of demand in which we demand a signed apology in which they are explicitly mentioning the colored community, who they have wronged. And in that apology, they must go further and make a commitment never to repeat such hate speech and racial stereotyping again.
And so will there be further steps? I know that there was an intention also to pursue hate speech charges against this group.
We, in fact, have already done that. We have laid charges of hate speech, and we have also laid charges of crimea injuria. And of course, as you have already stated, we are filing a complaint with the Human Rights Commission as well as the Equality Court. Those are the steps that we are taking as the Patriotic Alliance.
Yeah, there's a lot that's coming then for these podcasters. William, it's interesting because you've got Diego, who says, well, we've got a hate speech pledge at the South African Podcasters Guild. Not many podcasters are perhaps organized enough to be part of the guild and, you know, go through that pledge. But it does show just how much work needs to be done in informing and educating podcasters around the responsibility that we have. But then there's also the contentious and difficult discussion around how we even go about regulating what people do online.
So look, I think that, one of the things that would be a good idea would be for the Podcasters Guild to engage with other self and co-regulatory bodies like the Press Council, the BCCSA, and then look to see what elements they can merge or share with them in terms of how they deal with particular complaints. Because the benefit of a system like that is that when you get a case like this, there's an easy, cheap, effective, and speedy mechanism for any member of the public to utilize. So any podcaster, as it stands, can happily go and apply to join the Press Council, and then they'll be bound by that code, which means that if there's a complaint against them, it'll go through that, be assessed on the basis of that code, and then there will be an appropriate outcome given to that, as opposed to needing to go to either the Equality Court or to go to the civil court and lodge a case under Papuda in order to try and take these things further. So it's certainly something that we need to be considering in relation to not just this particular podcast, but in relation to South African podcasts, which is why this guild sounds like a very good idea. I think that's certainly a good start, and we would encourage them to either build in the mechanisms or work with other existing mechanisms so that they can have an effective complaints resolution mechanism. So I think those are the positive steps that I think we should have regard for. I think it's also worth noting that if you're going to condemn racism, you need to condemn it clearly and roundly, and not say it's okay in one instance and not okay in another. And that, I think, is typified by, unfortunately, the minister who, not too long ago was guilty of Afrophobia, talking about foreigners. And so I think it leaves people then thinking, well, what do we do with these figures in authority who will happily denounce and use negative stereotypes about non-South Africans, but then will appropriately, in our view, condemn the use of racism in a different context.
Now, when we come back, perhaps we need to get into some of the concerning trends that we are seeing taking place when people are able to have platforms that a lot of the time garner quite the following on social media and online. We, of course, have seen another matter, all of this playing out, during the same time, where you've got the podcast and chill issue as well coming to the fore with that female celebrity, reports of her wanting to sue that team for 2.5 million rand. So what are the concerning trends, and how do you balance freedom of speech with people that really have the platform, they believe, to say what they will, with the responsibility that comes with? Give us a call on 0105946010 or send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584. In fact, let's take a look at some of those messages that have come in from our viewers. Ayanda says, what those podcasters said is not acceptable, and it reverses the strides for a genuine rainbow nation. Ayanda Mbizana, thank you so much for that. Livuyo in the Eastern Cape says, good evening, Alidi. Remarks made on the Open Chats podcast is it's time for platforms to take a stand against hate speech and ensure that all voices are respected. Livuyo, thank you so much for that. Charles in Midrand said, hi, Naledi. The podcast is a very clear example of freedom of speech that has been used carelessly. Being on such a platform, the podcasters needed to be careful and sensitive. The comments are very offensive. A mere unconditional apology might not be enough. They may do justice by resigning. Racial tensions are not needed now that South Africa is faced with severe economic hardship from some trading partners. Indeed, not easy times for South Africans. Tsepo says the majority of podcasters are driven by number of viewers. They don't care about the damage they're causing to people. What they've said is propaganda, and they must be held accountable for that. Tsepo, thank you so much for those views. Is that what a lot of podcasters are looking at? The numbers at all costs. So share your thoughts with us. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. So we continue to get reaction from various role players around the issue around the Open Chats podcast that has gotten many South Africans talking after the podcast was seen making derogatory comments around coloured people in South Africa. Of course, the Patriotic Alliance having taken the steps to open a charge of hate speech against some of these podcasters. But what is it that we do about regulating podcasts, especially in an era where it's believed that, well, these are people that essentially have a lot of freedom of expression. Diego, I actually do want to bring that one to you. The trends that we're starting to see of that, what one viewer called an abuse of this freedom of expression, concerning trends where podcasters perhaps are hooking on to themes that attract numbers but are detrimental.
So I think you mentioned it earlier, and this is why we started this conversation about our SAPG pledge. You mentioned the podcast and chill incident that happened, and Philip is correct. We do want to put that mechanism in place where the podcasters can be held accountable, and the members of the general public can have a platform where they can lay a complaint, and we can have a look at that and resolve that quickly and effectively. So yes, there is a level of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, but that is clearly defined out in our current laws and legislation. And like the Patriotic Alliance has done, they've used that platform to take the Open Chats podcast to court and to let that run through the Equality Court and like the SA Human Rights Commission. So we need to let that process play out. Those are rules that are established in our laws and are governed. And as the SAPG, we are trying to be that platform that can help enforce those rules.
Yeah, but talk to me about the trends that we're seeing. So you talk about the podcast and chill incident. I'm talking about themes that are becoming louder and louder on some of these podcasts that are becoming more and more detrimental. Help us with that.
I think it's a difficult one to kind of regulate and to talk about. So yes, there are definitely themes, but people do have a freedom of expression. You can express your views. You can express your you have the right to do so. So I don't think we can regulate a theme particularly, but one does need to be careful with how you communicate that. So you can't be racist, you can't be hateful, you can't discriminate against people directly. That is something that we obviously don't stand for, and we won't stand for. But I think it becomes difficult then. Like I said, it's a fine line and it's a fine balance, and that's why we have the legal processes. So if somebody does take offense to something, then absolutely follow the legal route, go lay a complaint, or once we've established our pledge system, that come lay the complaint so that we can have a look at it and address it, because I don't think there's value in just blanket statement banning all communication, because then that goes against the Constitution and the freedom of speech. Yeah. So it does need to be regulated, and we do need to be careful with it, but we also have to stick within the bounds of the current Constitution.
Yeah, Mr. Mutale, what do you say to the argument that says, these young podcasters, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here. These are young podcasters that, may not necessarily be all that aware in terms of the ethics that they need to uphold when they have a platform like what they do have, and they've garnered the numbers. A media practitioner, for instance, in journalism, has a full understanding of the ethics that they need to uphold and the role that they play in society at a bigger scale. But when you're a podcaster, that's information you may very well not have access to.
No. We don't buy that excuse. If you have a look at the magnitude of the offenses that are being committed on this podcast, clearly you can see some of them are premeditated. They are just driven by the desire to have numbers and to generate revenue. So we really don't buy that excuse. We understand there's freedom of expression, but freedom of expression comes with responsibility. You can't use your right to express yourself freely to violate other people's rights and dignity. That one we say a big no to.
William, this balance and there is the access to of information, right? Where you've got podcasters that they know that this particular issue is going to get us the numbers. The numbers are how we monetize and boom, we've grown. It's a new market in the media. Many young people really looking to it and actually being able to make quite a living out of it. But and I asked this question to Diego earlier. Some of those themes that we're starting to see more and more of that perhaps we need to rein in.
So look, I think that what you're seeing is podcasters learning from what they see on social media. The events of this year have shown us how when you start to shift the boundaries of what's considered acceptable globally, we've seen the normalization of misogyny. So now on many of the platforms like X, for example, it's a place of just about anything goes. You can be an outward misogynist. You can express views that are profoundly, not just offensive, but profoundly racist, and certainly in many contexts may border on hate speech. And there's no kind of consequence to that. And it's not just that there's no consequence, it's that those themes dominate. And many people, we know this from instances of influencers, they use that kind of a language, they use that speech in order to get clicks and to create shares. So you've got a very sick business model that fundamentally works to reward people that stir anger, that stir resentment, that stir fear, that stir anxiety in order to generate income. And so it's not surprising then that you're going to get some podcasters that'll come on and go, oh, look, this is how these things work. It's the new model of social media. So of course they're going to replicate that. Yes. What you then have to do is say it's not just a matter of putting in place a self-regulatory mechanism, for example. That's not going to be enough. You have to work to say, how do we actively disincentivize people from making money from spreading that kind of content? Because you don't want to say, because ultimately you need a speech that is offensive, you need speech, you need people to express views that we may all find deeply repugnant and offensive. But you don't want to be incentivizing that kind of speech, right? So you're not saying you're going to ban it or remove it or censor it necessarily, but you are going to say we definitely want to find a better business model that doesn't openly and actively incentivize that. And unfortunately, the biggest social media platforms now all work towards that kind of content where if you can do something like that to generate that level of anger and ire, etc., then that's going to get you clicks, and you'll certainly use that as a mechanism to generate reward for yourself. And that's, I think, the big problem that we have to do is to say, structurally, we've got to find a much better and a more effective mechanism of actively disincentivizing people from rewarding and getting benefit from those kinds of messaging.
Yeah, I want to take some calls now and get to the views of those that are watching from home. Stephen is in Bloemfontein. Stephen, good evening. Thanks for calling.
Good evening.
Yes, talk to us, Stephen.
Well, as much as majority of people maybe feel like these people from that podcast, they need to be given like a harsh, maybe some form of repercussion. But I feel like that was not necessary because I believe it was for the very first time they committed such hate speech. So somehow I believe like maybe they also need to be given like a fair punishment, considering the fact that it was for the first time, and also considering that this is not, this is not a first culture that has ever experienced some form of hate speech. let's check, for an instance, how many times have the Zulus been insulted, but I've never ever come across a point whereby now they have taken this matter this far.
Yeah, but on a public platform, Stephen. So this is what we're talking about. So, I mean, it's one thing to have derogatory conversations in your home where really people aren't able to see it, and no one encourages that either. But on a public platform, to make a statement about a grouping in South Africa, whether it be coloured people, white people, black people, and say, well, this group is crazy, this group is incestuous. Surely that needing to be reined in because you're broadcasting these views. Stephen? Okay, Stephen's gone there. But it does speak to, I suppose, a bigger discussion that we need to have. And I think, Mr. Mutala, I want to bring this to you. Stephen says, how many times have Zulu people been insulted in the country? And there is something to be said about how the integration, unity and diversity project in South Africa, we've heard many times, isn't complete. And now we're starting to see it play out in the divisions in our society.
Yeah, as various sectors and political parties, we have, over the past 3 decades, trying to work towards racial harmony, which is a huge task. Now, like you have said, this is a public platform to spew such racial stereotyping and insults against a particular group of people in South Africa. It's taking us back. So there has to be consequences so that people know that there are consequences and there's punishment for such. We need something to serve as a deterrent for anybody who contemplates replicating that sort of behavior, to know that they will face consequences.
Yeah, it also speaks to just how much there needs to be an understanding, and William, I do want to give this to you, an understanding even by podcasters that even they have a massive responsibility to society in an era where the younger media consumers really looking online more than they do with the traditional media that we have in the country.
Yeah, certainly, and all the evidence points towards influencers and online content creators as being the ones that do generate the bigger audiences these days. And of course, some of them are going to, like an Andrew Tate, I mean, he's made his following by essentially disseminating outward misogyny, and we have to look at that and say, well, there's something deeply wrong with the system that actively rewards someone for being a sexist scumbag, and that's a simple reality. We have to say, well, what do we do about that? And in recognizing that, we say, in South Africa, we've got a very, very strong constitution. We've got very clear values of what we're trying to drive in our constitution that speak to tolerance, that speak to recognizing dignity and equality of all people. And that, let me emphasize, that's of all people, right, regardless of nationality or of race. In fact, and so we then have to say, within that framework, the thing that podcasters need to recognize is this one simple reality, which is you have the right to express yourself. The minute you then use that freedom to undermine other freedoms, you're necessarily undermining your own freedom of expression, because you can't say, I like these rights, but I don't like these other ones. Either you're in favor of rights and you support and you endorse them, or you say, I'm not interested in human rights at all, and I'm going to be some kind of a dictator like a Donald Trump or something along those lines. But the moment you undermine one right, you necessarily undermine all of them. And that's, I think, so it's not just a responsibility to not do those things. It's an understanding of saying, I've got this platform, we're doing these things, we're producing great content. Often it'll be trivial, maybe very controversial, offensive, etc. But it's recognizing that if you undermine other rights, you're necessarily going to be undermining that exact same platform. And that's something that I think people need to increasingly recognize, is that all of these things operate in a system. It's all interdependence, that if you recognize one, you must necessarily recognize the other. And if you undermine one, you undermine the other.
Interesting. Let's hear from David in Lusikisiki, one of our callers. David, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yes, man. My comment is, especially in the Eastern Cape, where coloureds are few, and now these derogatory comments are very common in the city. I mean, actually in the Eastern Cape in general. And some of us, as coloureds as we are, there are black people that we are related to, but you find that these derogatory comments and names they call us are very common, and you just have to smile along as if you know that there's nothing wrong with that. But it's a very common thing. I remember one time I had to challenge a radio station in Mhlabane where these derogatory names are being called. And when I spoke to the person who was in charge of the program, seemingly they didn't see anything wrong about that. So they just apologized. But you could see they're just apologizing because I'm raising the issue. Otherwise, they don't really see anything wrong about that. So it's a very common thing. But the unfortunate thing, if it was the other way around, then you'd see the media making a whole lot of noise and political parties slashing on whoever, even the courts, people being taken to court and so forth. But when it's other nationalities, if for argument's sake it was an African person being called by a K word, you would have seen the media. It would have been a hullabaloo in the whole country. But because it's colored, it's fine if black people can be racist on other races. But if it's other races being racist on them, it's a hell of a noise. And I don't know what's the cause for that.
Yeah, much frustration. Thank you so much for that contribution, David. And I think an important one as well. Perhaps what we need to do now is really start talking about, and we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll start talking about the step forward, the Patriotic Alliance, what is it that they're going to be working on next. And perhaps from William Bird and from Diego, we'll get resources for up-and-coming podcasters so that they don't find themselves in hot water on the other side of this. All right, welcome back. We're about to wrap up our discussion as we continue to get reactions to Open Chats, a podcast that has made the headlines after a video surfaced of them. And of course, this was as they were streaming as well. The derogatory comments that were made by those podcasters about coloured people in the country. That's the clip in the conversation that is even still making the rounds on social media. But the South African Human Rights Commission now probing the matter after various complaints were laid about the podcasters who described coloured people as incestuous, as crazy, and as people who sleep with their siblings. Very concerning. But we're taking one last caller. Biggie is in Secunda. Biggie, good evening.
Hi, ma'am, how are you?
I'm well, sir. Thank you for calling. Talk to us.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm also saying that now it is like high time now. Something needs to be done. Recently, about the same podcast, they insulted the Zulu people there, but there was nothing. There was no noise. There was nothing. But I am supporting what happened now. I'm supporting what the current community are doing. But I am concerned why it was not done when Zulu people was over insulted. Zulu people have been insulted in many platforms, but nothing is happening. But I'm also supporting. I am supporting what is happening now. I think it's high time to try and stop this nonsense because we are tired. We are tired of being insulted left and right in this country.
You know, Biggie, I did mention just before I spoke to you that the South African Human Rights Commission, for instance, is looking into this issue. And for any grouping in South Africa, there are these platforms where you can take these complaints, right? And it's not just necessarily say that one grouping's discrimination is more important than another. That being important for us to note. But Biggie, thank you so much for your contributions. Let's start to wrap things up. Diego, resources that are available for podcasters. The World Wide Web is available for anyone to set up a platform, but how do we do so responsibly? Where do we go to be able to, stick between the lines?
I think if we're going to talk specifically about podcasts, we would encourage everyone to have a look at our website, sapg.co.za. You'll find a whole bunch of resources on there. The pledge that I mentioned earlier that speaks against hate speech and any form of discrimination. And as we also mentioned, that we are planning to push forward that we are able to regulate this and people are able to send in complaints. Like the previous caller mentioned, like why wasn't something done against when the Zulu people saying, it's because we need people to actually address those complaints. We need people to send in those complaints so that it can be taken to the SA Human Rights Commission and to the Equality Courts. We're going to rely heavily on the general public to do that because there are so much content out there that we can't do it ourselves. So so have a look at our website. There's lots of resources to get started and we encourage people to get started. But as I mentioned, there's also that pledge there that we will keep people account to.
Yeah. William, some resources that you have for us as well?
So the South African Human Rights Commission published a social media code that's available on their website. There's a lot of really excellent advice and guidance on there. If people see instances of online harms, be it hate speech, incitement to violence, harassment, disinformation, they can report it to real411.org. I think in general terms, though, if you are young and starting a podcast, I think look to see what you can build and see how you can start to challenge the model, the existing social media model. That's been a model that serves a very particular perspective coming from North America, and it's certainly not something that I think fits within an African context, and certainly not that one that fits within a South African constitutional framework that believes in dignity and equality for all.
Yeah. Mr. Mutale, I'll let you have the last word here. Ideal outcomes on the part of the Patriotic Alliance, what you want to see at the end of all of this. And there's been some utterances about a march. Will the Patriotic Alliance be holding a march still?
No. There was an impression that this podcast is hosted by SABC. Now, that has since been corrected. The SABC has distanced itself from this podcast, so that much is no longer necessary. But then I want to appeal to Diego. When he spoke about the regulation mechanism, we don't want to see a self-regulatory mechanism like we are seeing with the Press Council, because that doesn't have teeth at all. We want to see offenders being punished and severely punished. I'll make an example. News 24, for instance, has reported inaccurately and deliberately so against us. And 4 times we have complained to the Press Council. And what was the outcome? The outcome is just apologize. So we cannot call that regulation. And the reason is they are self-regulating. So we need independent regulatory mechanism that will have teeth, be able to impose stiff fines against offenders so that people know that there are consequences for such offenses, like the ones committed by open chats.
Yeah, of course, the reports now being that MultiChoice has also dropped this open chats on that platform as well, coming out and saying...
it there.
Yeah, MultiChoice is aware of comments made on the Open Chats podcast, part of that statement, of course. But we're going to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Steve Mutale, Patriotic Alliance spokesperson, William Bird, who's Director of Media Monitoring Africa, and Diego Domingo, Director of Member Affairs at the South African Podcasters Guild. We take a short break. Your headlines at the top of the hour.